So today I want to talk to you about a word. It's a word we all use probably multiple times a day. It's controversial yet powerful, and it's a word that I've been trying to incorporate into my personal and professional life. That word is no. I knew I wanted to do my red bit on this topic for a while now, but to be honest, saying no is something that I really struggle with. And I thought to myself, how does someone who struggles with saying no get up here and talk about saying no? And while I struggle with saying no in my personal life, I found that the real battle for me is saying no in my professional life. How do you say no and still get your work done on time? How do you say no and still be a good teammate and asset to your company? And how do you say no and keep clients happy? So before I get into the meat of my red bit, I want to share a little bit about my journey with this word and why I find it so hard to say no. I think the easiest way to share this is to explain why it's hard for me to say no is to share my Enneagram results. For those of you who don't know, the Enneagram is a personality test in which you're assigned to one of its 9 types. I'm a 2, which is also referred to as the helper. They say that people of this type are either the most genuinely helpful to other people, or when they are less healthy, they are the most highly invested in seeing themselves as helpful. Being generous and going out of their way for others makes 2s feel that theirs is the richest, most meaningful way to live. Okay, so it sounds kind of charming, right? Well, let's dig a little deeper to understand why helpers help. Perhaps the biggest obstacle facing 2s is in their inner work is having to face their underlying center fear of worthlessness. Beneath the surface, all 3 types fear that they are without value in themselves, and so they must be or do something extraordinary in order to win love and acceptance from others. So I can't speak for all 2s, but I can say that this has been a real fear of mine for as long as I can remember, although I cannot pinpoint the adoption of this behavior back to a certain point in my childhood. I probably should explore this, but for now I'm good. Every one of the 9 Enneagram types has an associated consequence with it, and this just so happens to be mine. Because 2s are genuinely helping others meet their needs, they can forget to take care of their own. This can lead to physical burnout, emotional exhaustion, and emotional volatility. 2s need to learn that they can only be of true service to others if they are healthy, balanced, and centered in themselves. And this is where my journey started back in 2017. 2017 was a really hard year for me, both personally and professionally. And it was the first time that I started to feel my body react to my environment. I was stressed, I was tired, I wasn't eating, I was lashing out at friends and family, I was having panic attacks, and I even had severe chest pains. And when I looked back at that year, I realized that most of these symptoms were caused by me not setting and maintaining boundaries or addressing my needs at the appropriate time. Basically, I found myself in a routine of saying yes when I should have been saying no. So that leads me to what inspired this red bit. There are a lot of books on the topic of no, but a few months ago I found this one, The Power of a Positive No by William Ury. And what I really liked about this book was the fact that 25 years prior, he wrote a book called Getting to Yes. And I thought, who better to take advice from on how to say no than the guy who previously wrote about how to say yes? So why is saying no so important? According to Ury, each of us every waking hour is called upon to say no, whether to friends or family members, to our bosses, to employees or coworkers, or even to ourselves. Whether and how we say no determines the very quality of our lives. It is perhaps the most important word for us to learn how to say gracefully and effectively. And at the heart of the difficulty of saying no is the tension between exercising your power and tending to your relationships. Exercising your power may strain your relationship, while tending to your relationship may weaken your power. And there are 3 common approaches to this power versus relationship dilemma, which Ury refers to as the 3 trap. The first is to accommodate. So we say yes when we want to say no. In this case, we're stressing the relationship, even if it means sacrificing our own interests. The second is to attack. So in this case, we're saying no poorly. We use our power without concern for the relationship. We may feel angry for the other at their behavior or offended by their request, or simply frustrated by the situation. Naturally, we lash out. And the third is to avoid. We say nothing at all. We don't say yes, we don't say no. And this is actually the most common, especially in the day and age we live in now, because we are so afraid of offending or letting someone down that we say no, or we don't say anything at all, and we hope the problem goes away. Luckily, there's a way out of this trap, and it's called a positive no. A positive no challenges the assumption that either you can use power to get what you want at the cost of the relationship, or you can use relationship at the cost of power. It calls on you to use both at the same time, engaging the other in a constructive and respectful confrontation. The positive no formula is made up of 3 parts: a yes, a no, and a yes. So let's dive into each of the 3 parts that make up a positive no. Ury argues that the single biggest mistake we make when we say no is to start from no. We derive our no from what we are against, which is the other's demand or behavior. A positive no calls on us to do the exact opposite and base our no on what we are for. So instead of starting from no, start from yes. Root your no in a deeper yes, a yes to your core interests and to what truly matters. Some examples of yes are spending more time with family and friends, making time for exercise, or getting a good night's rest. Defining your yes takes you from a reactive state to a proactive state. So when you want to say no, just remember not to act out of anger. Take a deep breath and focus on your yes. Ask yourself what it is you're trying to protect. Shift from being reactive and focused on no to proactive and focused on yes. So uncovering your yes will accomplish 3 things. The first is it grounds you in something positive. Second is it gives you a sense of direction. And finally, it gives you energy. So now that we understand yes, let's talk about no. This is the most difficult part in the process, as this is where you're rejecting or saying no to a request or behavior. The problem with most no's is that they intentionally or unintentionally reject the other. The other often takes our no as a personal rejection. That may or may not be our intent, but what they hear is you and your interests don't matter. Ury argues that the secret to getting the other to eventually say yes is not to reject them, but to respect them. People are more likely to respect our interests if we respect theirs. And as we learned from Bree last week, the easiest ways to show respect is to listen and acknowledge the other. So since this is the hardest part in the process, I pulled out a couple of tips that he lists in the book that will help you empower your no. The first is to have a plan B. It might be difficult for someone to accept your initial no, and if that's the case, it's important to have a plan B to help you address your interests in situations when your initial no has not been accepted. The second is to build a winning coalition. So think to yourself, who shares my interests or might be persuaded to work with me to make sure my needs are respected? And finally, consider the worst case. In moments of tension, we tend to let our anxiety and fear magnify the potential consequences of saying no. When we take a clear-eyed look, we come to realize that those consequences are usually not as bad as we had thought. So that leads us to the final phase of a positive no, which is a positive proposal. The first yes in the formula is an affirmation of your core interests. So the second yes in the formula is an invitation to a positive outcome. Yes after your no shows respect for the other and their needs. The other will be much more likely to accept your no and agree to your interest if you can figure out a way to address theirs. And some examples of positive proposals include both and solutions instead of either or, so finding those opportunities for you both to win instead of just one of you. Later. Sometimes we can't help the other when they'd like to be helped, but if you're truly interested in helping them, it's okay to say, I can help you later. And lastly, if-then statements. If you want to say yes but are constrained by circumstances that may change, you can make a conditional offer. So state the conditions under which you could say yes. Okay, so it's time for an exercise. When I initially planned this out, I thought I'd have you write down your no's, and then I realized that's literally the exact opposite of what he's trying to say in his book. So I'm going to have you guys write down your yeses. And remember, your yeses are those interests or behaviors that you want to protect. For me, I'll give you an example. Currently, that's my health. So making time to exercise and stick to a routine is my number 1 yes. There should be pens and papers at your table, so I'll give you guys a minute or 2 to write down those yeses. Okay. Well, I won't ask anyone to share their yeses, but I do hope that you all keep this list top of mind, because there are going to be times when we all have to say no. And by having this list ready, it will strengthen your no and hopefully make it easier to deliver that no. So as I was getting closer to the end of the book, I wasn't sure what was left, what was next, or what advice was left to give. I realized that what I was wanting was a step-by-step guide on how to say no effectively in almost every situation that I could possibly imagine. But then I realized the challenge that I face. I'm trying to change a behavior that is so rooted in who I am, and that isn't something that can be changed overnight. So naturally, I started to panic until I got to the end of the book and read this. Changing old patterns takes practice. Fortunately, each of us is offered many opportunities a day to practice saying no. Think of it like exercise. You are building your positive no muscle. With daily exercise, that muscle will get stronger and stronger with practice and reflection. Anyone can improve greatly at the art of saying no. And I realize that, as with most challenges, it's important to prepare and practice until you're comfortable. So I'll leave you with this advice from Yuri. Start to pay attention to how you say no. Are you someone who accommodates, attacks, or avoids, or a combination of all three? Keep track of when you say no well and when you don't. Determine who you have the hardest time saying no to. Watch out for your unhealthy yeses and unhealthy nos. Reflect on what worked well and what didn't, and then try again. And I really enjoyed this book, and there's a lot that I couldn't cover. He does go into some tips on how to deliver your no, which is really powerful. So I bought a copy of the book, and I'll keep it in the library for anyone else who wants to dive in. Thank you.
Yay!